Survival of the Fattest, a Fairy Tale for Fat Kids by Valerie X. Armstrong. Once upon a time, even before her first day of school, Maya was aware that she was different. When she went outside to play, the neighborhood kids called her Fatso. They threw things at her and made oinking sounds like pigs. She would run home crying, not knowing what she did wrong to make the other children treat her that way. Her mother told her to ignore the other kids, that they were ignorant and she was beautiful. Maya was indeed heavier than the other children, although she didn't eat any more than they ate. She got plenty of exercise. She rode her bike, roller skated, and climbed trees. She swam at her beloved Florida beaches and played outside all day like most kids did. She had a couple of friends she spent time with that were aware of her weight, but seemed to like her in spite of it. Maya had been heavy since birth. There were photos in the family album of her chunky body and round little face looking out from the pages with wide, innocent eyes. In school, during gym class, she was always picked last for teams. She would be left standing there alone after all the other kids had been chosen. Her face burned with shame and embarrassment as the teacher told her which team to join. As she slowly walked over to join her appointed team, they would groan in disapproval for getting stuck with her, while the opposing team laughed and cheered. Getting weighed in school was a terrible experience for Maya. The teacher would weigh the children and shout each child's weight across the room in front of the whole class so a teacher's assistant could record the number in a book. There was no privacy. It wasn't a problem for the normal weight kids, but it was mortifying for Maya, whose weight was more than double that of her classmates. This was just another opportunity for Maya to feel humiliated in front of everyone. The other kids would make loud, unkind remarks about how fat she was and how she belonged in a circus. The saddest part of all was some of the teachers' insensitivity to this. In fact, there were teachers who laughed right along with the other kids. Maya became very shy and withdrawn. She, although very intelligent and quick to learn, stopped participating in class. This was because every time she was called upon to stand and read or go to the blackboard, the jeering would start. The two kids in her neighborhood that used to hang around with her stopped doing so. They were being taunted by the other kids for having her as their friend. The desk she had to sit in was too small for her. She had to force her body into it. It cut uncomfortably into her stomach and made it almost impossible for her to concentrate. She hated going in the lunchroom at school because every time she ate anything, even a celery stalk, some kid would tell her she didn't need to eat as she was fat enough already. Maya stopped wanting to go into the lunchroom altogether, so she would go hungry all day until after school and eat more at home as a result. Her family didn't realize she wasn't eating all day at school and was trying to make up for it by eating a little extra at home. They thought she was just eating more altogether. They put her on diets and hid food from her. They made snide remarks about her weight in an attempt to help her to be more aware of it, but she was already painfully and completely aware of it. She had nowhere to turn. She was being treated as though she were guilty of something that she was not guilty of. She was ridiculed both at home and at school. Regardless of how strictly she stuck to the diets, she could never keep the lost pounds off for any length of time. She was born a big girl, and as soon as the starvation-type food plans were discontinued and she returned to a normal pattern of eating, the pounds would creep back on. It seemed as though after every diet attempt, she would be heavier than before she started. Her family took her to doctor after doctor, and she was given pills and injections to help her to lose weight. Nothing had any lasting effect. She never ever cheated on her diets. She wanted nothing more in the world than to be thin and accepted by everyone. She had no stylish clothes to wear, which added to her problems of fitting in with the other kids. It was hard to find fashionable clothing in the stores for large kids. Her mother and grandmother had only one pattern in her size that they made into several dresses in different colors for her to wear to school. What little self-esteem Maya had left was being gradually worn away. It seemed like everyone in the world hated her because she was fat. She was clean, smart, good-natured. She had clear skin and beautiful eyes. She still had a good sense of humor, even after everything she had gone through. Maya was taller than average and carried her weight quite well. She had long medium brown hair and a very pretty face. She could do everything that anyone else could do, like dance and run and play, sports. None of these qualities seemed to matter, as no one was able to see past her size. When they had school dances that were mandatory for students to attend, Maya was always a wallflower. She wanted desperately to take part in some of her school's activities, but she was never chosen to be in anything that she actually wanted to be in. She longed to be part of the girls' marching team that carried the school's colors in parades and wore cute uniforms with short skirts and white tasseled boots. She had to settle for being in chorus, where they could cover up her body with a loose robe and stick her in the back row on the risers, so all that could be seen of her was the top of her head. She sang her heart out, although it was breaking. People were always telling Maya that her health would suffer because of her weight. She ate a healthy diet and got plenty of exercise. She just stayed big. Doctors seemed puzzled when their predictions about her health degenerating failed to come true. Her blood pressure was fine, her blood sugar and cholesterol numbers were exactly where they should be, although she was even heavier from years of repeated dieting. Maya did not have many suitors. Boys that she liked didn't return her affection, although boys that she wasn't particularly attracted to sometimes expressed an interest in her. She thought the more unattractive boys felt she would go out with them because she didn't have any other choices, and most of the time that turned out to be true. Occasionally, Maya would accept a date from one of the not-so-good-looking boys, so as not to always have to stay home alone on a Friday or Saturday night. She discovered that many of these boys had a lot to offer, just as she did. She started to appreciate others for what they were like on the inside instead of their outward appearance. Once she was out of school, Maya's personality that had been stifled most of her life began to emerge. She was becoming the laughing, happy young woman that she was always meant to be. She had a good job and was dating a few nice young men. Her life was starting to become what she had always hoped for. While watching the TV news programs, Maya noticed that they spoke often of an obesity epidemic that was being attributed to the fast food restaurants and the availability of high-fat, high-sugar foods. Maya wondered about that, as she had been the only fat girl in her school, and now the schools were filled with very heavy kids. It seemed to happen extremely quickly. Also on the news, there were talks of a possible nuclear catastrophe looming on the horizon that threatened to end life on the Earth as we know it. There were mentions made of a long nuclear winter where any survivors would surely starve because there would be no sunlight to grow food, and most all life forms would perish. Maya wondered if the obesity epidemic was possibly our most basic human instincts kicking in to fatten us up for the lean times to come, as a bear readies itself for hibernation to survive during the long, cold months ahead. One beautiful sunny day, as Maya was sitting in her yard looking out into the distance beyond the lake, she saw something that she had hoped she would never see in her lifetime. She saw a gigantic mushroom-shaped cloud, generally associated with an atomic bomb explosion. She ran inside to turn on the television to see if there was anything on the news. Before the TV went blank, she heard the newscaster say in a panicked voice that our country was under attack and that many major cities in the United States were no longer there, along with many major European cities that had also been leveled. He further stated that our armed forces had returned fire and that people should seek shelter wherever they could and pray for God's mercy. Maya's family was still all right and her house intact. As far as she could see, her neighborhood had survived at least the initial attack. She ran to find the emergency weather radio, and through the static she heard of many cities in Florida that were no longer there, as well as major cities to the north. From the way it sounded, Maya's area was in a little pocket that had gone virtually unharmed by the decimation all around. From what Maya could determine, she and the other people near her were quite possibly some of the only people still alive on the planet. The sun was not visible at all. Darkness fell over the face of the earth. The air was full of dust, and it was very difficult to breathe. The lake behind Maya's house was the only source of water for her area. People had their generators, candles, and canned foods that they kept on hand for hurricane season, but these supplies were soon depleted as the nuclear winter continued. The gas ran out for the generators, and before long the pantries became empty. People became ill and showed signs of malnutrition. The girls that Maya had always envied for their lovely slim figures became pathetic skeletal versions of their former selves. Meanwhile, Maya had lost some weight too, but she was still very healthy and robust, as she had been able to sustain herself from her stored fat. She became even more beautiful than before, in stark contrast to the starving former beauties with their bloated bellies and sunken eyes and cheeks. It made Maya so sad to see this happening to those around her, even to those that had made fun of her in school. She was such a kind person. She would give up her rations to feed the others that were dying. After several months, most of the people in the town had perished from lack of food. There weren't many survivors, only Maya and a few others that had been overweight, some of which had sought refuge there after their nearby towns had been destroyed. One of those was a young man who was incredibly handsome. Maya had fallen hopelessly in love with him. He told her he had been the fattest kid in his school, but if he hadn't been that big, he never would have survived the famine. She told him the one thing that she had hated most about herself was the thing that had saved her life, her excess weight. He asked her to be his wife, and she replied that she would love to spend whatever time she had left with him. They were both very compassionate and loving people who had come to value people's hearts and minds above their appearances because of their own experiences growing up. They would lie in each other's arms and talk about being a new age Adam and Eve, repopulating the earth with kinder, gentler, more caring people that would never inflict harm, either physical or emotional, on one another. Maya was so happy to have finally found her soulmate and the love that she had always dreamed of. But she was also sad, for she knew it would all soon come to an end when they too became emaciated and died of starvation in the darkness. Maya's fears were short-lived, however, for she suddenly looked up and saw a sight she hadn't seen in a very long time. The glorious sun was peeping through the clouds of dust. She knew at once that everything was going to be all right, and she and her true love would live happily ever after. The beginning. Valerie X. Armstrong is a former fat kid who grew up in Miami during the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. She's an artist and designer now residing in Central Florida.